My name is Maya Chen, and for 19 years I believed I was dying. I believed it because the only mother I ever knew told me so. Because the only father I ever knew confirmed it with medical documents I was too young to understand. Because my sister, the golden child, the beloved daughter, the one they actually wanted, looked at me with pity mixed with something else I couldn't name until much later. Guilt. She knew what they were doing to me. She knew, and she said nothing. This is the story of how I was raised to be spare parts. How I survived 19 years in a house that treated me like a living organ donor rather than a daughter. How I finally learned the truth. And how I made sure no one could ever do to another child what the Harmon family did to me. This is not a story about forgiveness. This is a story about survival. I don't remember being adopted. I was 6 months old when Margaret and Robert Harmon brought me into their home in Westchester County, New York. A beautiful colonial house with a wraparound porch and a garden that Margaret tended obsessively. The kind of house that looks like love from the outside. I don't remember my birth mother. I don't know her name. The adoption was closed, no information shared, no contact allowed. I know this only because when I was older, much older, I searched for my records and found almost nothing. As if I had simply appeared in the Harmon home fully formed, a baby with no history. I know now that this was deliberate, that the absence of my past was part of the plan. The Harmons already had a daughter when they adopted me, Natalie. She was 2 years old when I arrived, a beautiful little girl with blonde curls and blue eyes, and the kind of smile that made everyone who met her want to protect her from everything bad in the world. Natalie was perfect. Everyone said so. Margaret said so constantly. "My perfect girl," she'd say, stroking Natalie's hair with a tenderness I would spend my entire childhood trying to earn and never receiving. I was not perfect. I was told this often enough that I understood it as fact before I understood what the word meant. I had dark hair, straight and black, nothing like Natalie's golden curls. I had dark eyes that Margaret said were too serious and unnerving in a child. I was quiet. I cried easily, which irritated Robert. I was difficult, which seemed to be the worst thing a child could be in that house. But I was healthy. That, at least, was important to them. Very important. I was 4 years old when Margaret and Robert told me I was sick. I remember the conversation because it was the first time I saw Margaret cry. We were sitting in the living room, the formal one that we were only allowed in for important occasions. Margaret was on the couch. Robert stood by the fireplace. Natalie, 6 years old, sat beside Margaret, holding her hand. I sat alone on the ottoman, small and confused. "Maya," Margaret said, and her voice was shaking. "Sweetheart, we need to tell you something very difficult." I didn't understand most of what came next. The words were too big, too medical, too adult. But the message was clear. I was sick, very sick, something wrong with my heart. Something that meant I would need medicine for the rest of my life. Something that meant I had to be very careful, very good, very obedient to stay healthy. "Do you understand, Maya?" Robert asked, looking at me with an expression I now recognize as calculation, but at the time read as concern. I nodded, even though I didn't understand. I was 4. I understood that everyone was sad and that it was because of me. I understood that I was the reason Margaret was crying. "You have to take your medicine every day," Margaret said. "Every single day. If you don't, you could get very, very sick. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mama," I whispered. "And you can't tell anyone," Robert added. "This is family business, private. If you tell people at school or doctors or anyone, they might take you away from us. They might put you in a hospital forever. Is that what you want?" "No," I said, terrified. "Good girl," Margaret said, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Natalie, stroking her hair, holding her close. I didn't know then that there was nothing wrong with my heart. That the medicine I would take every single day for the next 15 years was designed to keep me weak, to keep me manageable, to keep me from growing strong enough to question what was happening to me. I didn't know that I had been diagnosed with a terminal illness that didn't exist because they needed me to believe I was dying, so I would be grateful for every day they let me live. The medicine came in a small white pill every morning and evening. Margaret administered it personally, standing over me while I swallowed, checking my mouth afterward to make sure I'd actually taken it. "Open," she'd say. "Lift your tongue, good." If I fought, and in the beginning, sometimes I did, because the medicine made me feel strange and tired and wrong. Robert would hold me down while Margaret forced it into my mouth and held my jaw closed until I swallowed. "This is keeping you alive, Maya," Margaret would say. "This is the only reason you're still here. Be grateful." I learned to be grateful. I learned to swallow the pill without fighting. I learned that compliance was survival. The medicine made me tired. Constantly, deeply tired. While Natalie ran through the house with endless energy, I struggled to keep up. While she played sports and joined after-school activities, I came home from school and napped. While she was vibrant and alive, I was a ghost moving through the house, pale and exhausted and failing at being a child. "Maya's not feeling well," Margaret would tell people when they asked why I wasn't at the birthday party, the school play, the family gathering. "She has a heart condition. She needs to rest." People nodded sympathetically. They told me I was brave. They told me I was lucky to have a family that took such good care of me. I believed them. I was 4, then 5, then 6, then 7. I believed everything the adults in my life told me because children don't know yet that adults can lie, that parents can lie, that the people who are supposed to protect you can be the ones hurting you most. Natalie and I were not treated the same. This was obvious to anyone who spent more than 5 minutes in our house, though people rarely commented on it. Or if they did, it was in whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. Natalie had the larger bedroom, the one with the bay window and the window seat, and enough space for all her toys and books and art supplies. My room was smaller, darker, with a single small window that faced the neighbor's fence. Natalie had a canopy bed with a white lace cover. I had a twin bed with a thin blanket. Natalie had new clothes every season. I wore hand-me-downs from cousins or clearance items Margaret bought without enthusiasm. Natalie had birthday parties with themes and decorations and a dozen friends. My birthdays were acknowledged with a grocery store cake and a card. "We have to be careful with money because of Maya's medical expenses," Margaret would tell Natalie when she asked why we were treated differently. "Maya's medicine is very expensive. We have to make sacrifices." This made sense to Natalie. It made sense to everyone. Sick children are expensive. Families make sacrifices. What no one questioned was why those sacrifices only ever seemed to come from me. Natalie got music lessons, dance classes, summer camps. I stayed home. Natalie got to choose what we had for dinner on her nights. I ate what I was given. Natalie got hugs and I love yous and bedtime stories. I got take your medicine and go to your room and don't make things difficult. I want to be clear about something. I didn't hate Natalie. How could I? She was my sister, the only sister I knew, and she was kind to me in her way. She shared her toys when Margaret wasn't looking. She let me sit on her bed and watch her do her homework. She defended me when kids at school asked why I looked so tired all the time. But she also accepted without question that she deserved more than I did. That her life was valuable in a way mine was not. That this was simply the natural order of things. She was 6 years old when it started. What could she possibly have understood about what was really happening? But as she got older, 8, 10, 12, 14, she continued to accept it, continued to benefit from it, continued to say nothing. Every 3 months, Margaret took me to see Dr. Harrison at Westchester Medical Center. These appointments were mandatory, non-negotiable. Margaret scheduled them months in advance and made sure nothing conflicted with them. "Maya's checkup is sacred," she'd tell people. "We can't miss them. Her life depends on it." Dr. Harrison was an older man, probably in his 60s, with white hair and glasses and the kind of gentle manner that made you trust him immediately. He'd been my doctor since I was 4, since the diagnosis. The appointments followed the same pattern every time. Dr. Harrison would check my heart, listen to my breathing, look in my eyes and ears and throat. He'd ask me questions about how I was feeling. Tired, dizzy, any chest pain, any trouble breathing. I always said yes to some of these, because I was always tired, always a little dizzy, always feeling wrong in ways I couldn't fully articulate. That's the condition, Dr. Harrison would say gravely. The medication helps, but it can't fix everything. You're very brave, Maya. Then he'd take blood, vial after vial after vial. More blood than seemed necessary. More blood than he took from other kids in the waiting room who'd come in for their checkups. We need to monitor her levels very carefully, he'd explain to Margaret, who nodded seriously. With her condition, we can't be too cautious. I hated the blood draws, hated the needle, hated watching the dark red fill the vials, hated the weakness that followed. But I endured it because I was told it was necessary, that it was keeping me alive. I didn't know then that those blood samples weren't testing for any disease. They were testing my compatibility, making sure I remained a suitable donor, making sure that when the time came, my organs would be viable for the daughter they actually loved. When I was 12 and Natalie was 14, everything changed. Natalie started getting tired, really tired. She'd come home from soccer practice and sleep for hours. She'd skip breakfast because she felt nauseous. She lost weight, not a lot at first, but enough that people noticed. Her skin, usually sun-kissed and glowing, took on a pale, grayish quality. Margaret noticed immediately. Within a week, Natalie was at the doctor. Within 2 weeks, she was at a specialist. Within a month, she had a diagnosis that was real. Kidney disease, genetic, progressive. She would need a transplant eventually, maybe in a year, maybe in 5, but eventually. And in the meantime, she needed monitoring, treatment, careful management of her diet and stress levels. The house, which had always revolved around Natalie, now revolved around her with an intensity that bordered on religious fervor. Margaret quit her part-time job to focus on Natalie's care full-time. Robert worked longer hours to pay for the medical expenses. Their entire world narrowed to this one singular focus, saving Natalie. I was 12 years old, and I understood, with the clarity that sometimes comes to children in terrible situations, that if Natalie died, they would have nothing left to live for. I also understood, though I couldn't have articulated it then, that my value in the family was somehow tied to Natalie's illness, that I had suddenly become more important, more carefully watched, more necessary. The medicine dosage increased. The hospital visits became monthly instead of quarterly. Dr. Harrison started doing more tests, not just blood, but imaging, organ function tests, tissue typing that he explained as making sure Maya's heart condition isn't affecting other systems. Margaret's treatment of me shifted in subtle ways. She wasn't kind, she'd never been kind, but she was more attentive. She made sure I ate enough, slept enough, stayed healthy. She watched me with a new intensity that felt less like motherly concern and more like a farmer monitoring livestock. We need to keep Maya as healthy as possible, I heard her tell Robert one night when they thought I was asleep. Everything depends on it. I didn't understand what she meant, not then. As Natalie's condition worsened over the next 3 years, the pressure in the house became suffocating. Everything was about Natalie. Every conversation, every decision, every dollar spent. Natalie's doctor appointments. Natalie's dietary restrictions. Natalie's education suffering because she missed so much school. Natalie's friends drifting away because she couldn't participate in activities anymore. Natalie's future, what little of it she might have if we couldn't find a donor in time. Margaret cried constantly. Robert became harder, angrier, more volatile. And Natalie, beautiful, perfect Natalie, became bitter in a way that made my heart ache for her even as she took that bitterness out on me. "You're so lucky," she said to me once when we were alone. She was 16, I was 14. She was lying on the couch, too weak to do much else, and I was doing my homework at the kitchen table. "You're so lucky you just have a heart thing. At least your condition is manageable. At least you're not dying." I stared at her. I have a heart condition. I take medicine twice a day. I get exhausted walking upstairs. How is that lucky? "Because you're not me," she snapped. "Because people don't look at you like you're already dead. Because you get to have a future." I didn't know what to say to that. I'd spent my entire life being told I was fragile, breakable, one missed pill away from catastrophe. And here was Natalie, telling me I was the lucky one. "I'm sorry you're sick," I said quietly. "I wish I could help." Something flickered across her face, something that looked like guilt or maybe fear. "Yeah," she said, turning away. "Me too." The summer I turned 15, I overheard a conversation that didn't make sense to me, but lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. It was late past midnight. I'd woken up thirsty and gone downstairs for water. As I reached the kitchen, I heard voices in Robert's study. The door was slightly ajar. Margaret and Robert, talking in low, urgent tones. I should have gone back upstairs, but something in their tone, the secrecy, the tension, made me stop and listen. "Can't wait much longer," Margaret was saying. "Her kidney function is deteriorating faster than they predicted. We need to move the timeline up." "I know," Robert's voice was strained. "But we have to be careful. If we rush it, if anyone suspects." "No one will suspect. Harrison has been documenting Maya's deterioration for years. The narrative is already in place. Tragic heart condition, finally catching up with her. Family decides to do testing to see if she's a match for her sister, miracle match. Family pulls together. What if Maya refuses?" Silence. Then Margaret's voice, cold and hard. "She won't refuse. She's been conditioned since she was 4 years old to believe she's only alive because we allow it. She'll be grateful for the opportunity to save Natalie, and if she's not," a pause, "she's a minor. We have medical power of attorney. We can make the decision for her." My hand tightened on the water glass. My heart, the heart they'd told me was defective, was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. "What about after?" Robert asked. "When it's done?" "People survive with one kidney all the time." Margaret's tone was dismissive. "She'll be fine. Not that it matters. Once Natalie has what she needs, Maya's served her purpose. We can minimize our obligations after that." I didn't understand all of it. I was 15, medically naive, and so thoroughly gaslit that I couldn't process what I was actually hearing. But I understood enough to be afraid. I understood that they were planning something. I understood that it involved me and Natalie and my organs. I understood that when they said, "Maya's served her purpose," they meant I was disposable. I went back to my room. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about what I'd heard, trying to make sense of it, failing. In the morning, I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed it. Almost. 2 weeks later, Margaret and Robert called a family meeting. Natalie sat on the couch, pale and thin. I sat in the armchair by the window. Margaret and Robert stood, which should have been my first clue that this was a performance, not a conversation. "Girls," Robert began, "we need to talk about something very serious. Natalie's condition has gotten worse. The doctors say she needs a kidney transplant within the next 6 months, or—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. "The waiting list for donor kidneys is years long," Margaret continued. "We don't have years, so we've been exploring other options. Living donors, family members who might be compatible." My stomach dropped. The conversation from 2 weeks ago came rushing back. "Maya," Margaret turned to me, "we'd like you to get tested, to see if you're a match for Natalie." I stared at her. My mouth was dry. "But my heart condition, wouldn't surgery be dangerous for me?" "Dr. Harrison says you're stable enough," Robert said smoothly. "The risk is minimal, and it would only be one kidney. People live perfectly normal lives with one kidney." "You'd be saving your sister's life," Margaret added. Her voice had taken on that pleading quality I'd heard so rarely directed at me. "You'd be giving her a future, a chance. Isn't that worth any risk?" I looked at Natalie. She was crying silently, looking at me with those blue eyes that had looked at me with pity my entire life. "Please, Maya," she whispered. "I don't want to die." What could I say to that? What could anyone say to that? "Okay," I heard myself say. "I'll get tested." Margaret exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're doing such a brave, wonderful thing." It was the kindest thing she'd said to me in years, and I should have known right then that something was terribly wrong. Because Margaret was never kind to me unless she wanted something. The testing happened at Westchester Medical, overseen by Dr. Harrison and a team I was told were transplant specialists. Blood tests, imaging, tissue typing, psychological evaluation. The psychological evaluation should have been where someone noticed. Should have been where someone asked the questions that might have uncovered the truth. But the psychologist, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard, asked her questions in a way that made it clear what answers she expected. You want to help your sister, don't you? You understand this is voluntary. You understand the risks. You're not being pressured by your family. I said yes to all of it, because I'd been taught my entire life that obedience kept me alive. That questioning authority was dangerous. That my role in this family was to be grateful and compliant and invisible except when I was needed. And I was needed now, finally. For something other than being the broken one, the expensive one, the burden, I could be the hero. I could save Natalie. I could maybe, finally, earn the love I'd been chasing my entire life. The tests came back. I was a perfect match, 6 out of 6 antigens. The transplant team said it was remarkable, like finding a needle in a haystack. I know now that it wasn't remarkable. It was planned. I'd been selected as an infant specifically because my tissue type made me compatible with Natalie. That was why they'd adopted me. That was why they'd kept me weak and compliant and grateful for 15 years. I was never their daughter. I was spare parts. The surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In those 3 weeks, things started to crack. The first crack, Dr. Harrison scheduled a pre-op appointment that Margaret insisted on attending. Usually, she sat in the waiting room during my appointments. This time, she came into the exam room, and I saw her hand Dr. Harrison an envelope. He pocketed it without looking at it. Standard preoperative physical, he said, not meeting my eyes. But there was nothing standard about it. He didn't check my heart, the heart that was supposedly the reason I needed all this medical care. He checked my kidney function, my blood pressure, my overall health. He was checking that I was suitable for organ donation, not monitoring a heart condition. You're very healthy, Maya, he said when he was done. Very healthy indeed. The way he said it made my skin crawl. The second crack, I overheard Margaret on the phone with someone. Only needs 1 kidney. We'll take the second one for backup. Backup, take the second one. I stood outside her bedroom door, barely breathing. Yes, I know it's not standard, but Harrison says as long as we're already in there, we might as well harvest both. She'll be on immunosuppressants anyway for the heart condition. My heart condition. The heart condition that suddenly they didn't seem worried about anymore. The heart condition that was never mentioned in the context of my surgery risk. The third crack, I found paperwork in Robert's study. Medical documents. I shouldn't have been snooping, but fear had made me reckless. The documents were about me, my medical history, my test results. There was nothing in them about a heart condition. Nothing. Years of supposed cardiac monitoring, medication, careful management, and it wasn't anywhere in my actual medical file. What was in the file? Patient acquired for tissue compatibility, conditioning protocol successful, donor preparation on schedule. Donor preparation, conditioning protocol, acquired. I stared at those words until they stopped making sense, until the paper shook in my hands, until I heard footsteps in the hallway and had to shove the documents back in the drawer and run to my room. That night, I didn't take my medicine. I palmed the pill, pretended to swallow, and hid it under my mattress. The next morning, I did the same. By the third day, I felt different. Not sick, not the way they'd always told me I'd feel if I missed my medicine. I felt clearer, more alert, less exhausted. By the end of the week, I felt better than I had in my entire life. That's when I knew. That's when I finally, truly understood what they'd been doing to me since I was 4 years old. There was nothing wrong with my heart. There never had been. The medicine wasn't keeping me alive. It was keeping me weak. They'd been poisoning me for 11 years. I had 2.5 weeks before the surgery, 2.5 weeks to figure out what to do. I couldn't go to Margaret or Robert. I couldn't go to Dr. Harrison. He was part of it. I couldn't go to Natalie. She was sick, yes, but she'd known. She'd known what they were doing to me, and she'd said nothing because she wanted to live. I had no other family. The adoption had been closed. I had no birth certificate, no social security card that I could access, no documentation of my existence beyond what the Harmons controlled. I was 15 years old, medically gaslit, legally powerless, and trapped in a house with people who had spent years preparing to harvest my organs like I was livestock. So I did the only thing I could think of. I called the police. Not 911. I was afraid they'd just send someone to the house and Margaret would explain it all away. Instead, I looked up the non-emergency number for the Westchester County Police and I called from the school payphone during lunch. "I need to report child abuse," I said. The operator connected me to a detective, Detective Sarah Martinez. I'll never forget her name. I told her everything, the medicine, the hospital visits, the documents I'd found, the conversation I'd overheard, the planned surgery, all of it tumbling out in a rush of words I couldn't control. "Where are you right now?" Detective Martinez asked. "School, Westridge High School." "Stay there, don't go home. I'm sending officers to pick you up right now. Do you understand? Do not leave school property. Do not get in a car with your parents if they come for you." "Okay," I whispered. "Maya," her voice was gentle but firm, "you're very brave. You did the right thing calling. We're going to help you." 2 officers came to my school. They took me to the police station. Detective Martinez met me there, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that made me feel, for the first time in my life, like an adult might actually believe me. She listened to everything again, took notes, called Child Protective Services, called the DA's office, called the medical board. "We need to examine you," she said gently. "Is that okay? We need to verify that you've been receiving unnecessary medical treatment. We'll take you to a different hospital, not Westchester Medical, doctors who aren't connected to your case." I agreed. They took me to St. Vincent's in Manhattan. A team of doctors examined me, took blood, ran tests. The results came back within hours. There was nothing wrong with my heart. There never had been. My cardiac function was perfect. My organs were healthy. The only thing wrong with me was that I was malnourished and showed signs of long-term benzodiazepine exposure. The medication they'd been giving me for 11 years wasn't heart medication. It was a sedative, a drug designed to keep me foggy, compliant, weak. The doctors were horrified. Detective Martinez was livid, and I just felt numb. They arrested Margaret and Robert that evening. At the house. In front of Natalie, who called me crying and begging me to tell the police it was all a misunderstanding. "They were trying to save me," she sobbed into the phone. "Maya, please, I'm dying. They were just trying to save my life. How can you do this to me?" "They were trying to harvest my organs without my informed consent," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat, cold. "They've been poisoning me since I was 4. They bought me specifically to use me as spare parts for you. Did you know that, Natalie?" Silence. Then, quietly, "I knew you were adopted to be my donor, but I didn't know about the medicine. I swear I didn't know about that." "But you knew the rest." "I was 6 when they told me. I was a child. What was I supposed to do?" "You've been 16, 17, 18. You could have said something. You could have told someone. But you didn't because you wanted to live. And you didn't care what it cost me." "That's not fair." "Fair," I laughed, and it came out bitter and wrong. "You want to talk about fair? I'll tell you what's not fair, Natalie. Having parents who never loved you. Having a sister who knew you were being abused and said nothing. Spending 15 years thinking you were dying when you were perfectly healthy. That's not fair. You not getting my kidney. That's just consequences." I hung up. She called back 17 times. I never answered. Dr. Harrison was arrested the next morning. The medical board launched an investigation that uncovered that he'd been falsifying medical records for years, not just for me, but for other children in similar situations. He'd been part of an underground network facilitating questionable organ transplants for wealthy families. The charges against Margaret and Robert Harmon were extensive: child abuse, medical fraud, conspiracy to commit forced organ harvesting, kidnapping, because the adoption had been obtained under false pretenses, and about 6 other charges that the DA's office kept adding as they dug deeper into what the Harmons had done. The media descended. The case was everywhere. Couple adopted child to harvest organs for biological daughter. Girl poisoned for 11 years to keep her weak for organ donation. Westchester doctor arrested in organ harvesting conspiracy. I was in foster care by then. A temporary placement with a woman named Patricia who was kind and patient and didn't push me to talk when I didn't want to. The state had taken custody. I was finally, truly, legally separated from the Harmons. I was safe, but I wasn't okay. The trial happened 8 months later. I testified. So did the doctors from St. Vincent, who'd examined me. So did forensic accountants who'd traced payments from Robert Harmon to Dr. Harrison over the years. So did social workers who'd interviewed me multiple times and documented the abuse. The defense tried to paint it as a misunderstanding. Desperate parents trying to save their dying daughter. Medical decisions made in good faith. A devoted family torn apart by tragedy. The prosecution brought receipts. Literally, documentation of the adoption process where the Harmons had specifically requested a child with Natalie's blood type. Emails between Margaret and Dr. Harrison discussing how to manage the donor's conditioning. The medication records showing years of unnecessary sedatives. My medical files showing no evidence of any heart condition. Recordings of Margaret discussing taking both my kidneys. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Margaret and Robert Harmon guilty on all counts. Margaret got 25 years. Robert got 30. Dr. Harrison got 40 and lost his medical license permanently. They appealed. They lost. They're currently serving their sentences in separate facilities. I've never visited them. I never will. Natalie didn't go to prison. She was a victim, too, the courts decided. A child who'd been manipulated by her parents into accepting an abusive situation. She was given therapy, placed with relatives in California, given a chance at a normal life. She also continued to need a kidney transplant. After the trial, she went on the donor waiting list like every other patient waiting for an organ. I don't know if she ever got one. I don't follow her life. I don't want to know. She wrote to me once, about a year after the trial. A long letter explaining and apologizing, and asking me to understand that she'd been a child too, that she'd been sick, that she'd been scared, that she never wanted any of this to happen the way it did. I read the letter once. Then I threw it away. Because here's the thing, she was a victim, yes, but she was also complicit. At 6, at 8, at 10, maybe she couldn't have done anything. But at 14, 15, 16, she knew. She knew what they were doing to me, and she said nothing because my suffering was the price of her survival. And I can't forgive that. I don't have to forgive that. After the trial, after the dust settled, I started looking for my birth mother. The adoption records were unsealed as part of the criminal case. I learned her name, Diane Chen. She'd been 19 when she had me. Single, broke, terrified. She'd placed me for adoption, believing I'd go to a loving family who wanted a child. She had no idea what the Harmons had actually wanted. I found her through social media. She was living in California, married with 3 kids, my half-siblings. She'd spent 16 years wondering about the baby she'd given up, hoping I was happy, believing she'd done the right thing. I sent her a message, told her who I was, told her what had happened to me. She called me within an hour, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was giving you a better life. I thought, God, I'm so sorry." "You didn't know," I told her. "You were lied to the same way I was. This isn't your fault." "Can I meet you?" she asked. "Can I don't want to pressure you, I don't want to push, but Maya, I've thought about you every single day for 16 years. Can I please see you?" I met her 3 weeks later in a coffee shop in Manhattan. She was early. I was late. When I walked in, she stood up so fast she knocked over her chair. We looked alike. I hadn't expected that. Same dark hair, same dark eyes, same shape of face. For 16 years, I'd stood next to Natalie looking nothing like her, and Margaret had made it clear that my differentness was a flaw. But standing next to Diane, I saw myself reflected back. We talked for 4 hours. She told me about her life, her other children, her regrets. She told me that she'd been young and alone and had believed adoption was the best choice. She told me that if she'd known, if she'd had any idea, she never would have let me go. I told her about the Harmons, about the medicine and the isolation and the 11 years of believing I was dying, about Natalie and the planned organ harvesting, about the trial and the aftermath and the years of therapy I was now in trying to undo the damage. "You're so strong," she said, crying. "You survived something that should have broken you." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "I feel angry, all the time. At them, at Natalie, at every adult who saw me and didn't question why I was so sick and so isolated and so different from their real daughter." "That's okay," Diane said. "You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel." "Are you angry?" She wiped her eyes. "At them, furious, at myself, every single day, but mostly I'm just grateful you're alive, that you got out, that I get a chance to know you now." We started slowly. Emails, then phone calls, then regular visits. I met my half-siblings, 13, 11, and 8 years old when I entered their lives. They were confused at first, then curious, then accepting in the way that children are when adults just present something as fact. "This is your big sister Maya," Diane told them. "She's been away for a long time, but she's home now." And maybe that was true. Maybe I was finally home. I'm 24 now. It's been 5 years since the trial. 5 years since I escaped the Harmons. 5 years of therapy and healing and trying to build a life from nothing. I live in California near Diane and my half-siblings. I'm in college, studying social work, because I want to help other kids who have been abused and overlooked by the systems that were supposed to protect them. I want to be the person who notices when something's wrong. The person who asks the questions no one else asks. The person who believes children when they say something's not right. I still have hard days. Days when I wake up and for a moment I'm back in that house, taking medicine I don't need, preparing to sacrifice my body for a sister who never loved me. Days when I'm angry at everyone, at the Harmons for what they did, at Natalie for her complicity, at every doctor and teacher and neighbor who saw me and didn't see that something was wrong. But I also have good days. Days when I sit with my half-siblings and help them with homework. Days when Diane looks at me with pride and says she's glad I'm her daughter. Days when I realize that I'm 24 years old and healthy and alive and free, and that's something they can never take away from me. The Harmons are in prison. Dr. Harrison is in prison. The system that failed me has been reformed in small ways. Better oversight of adoption cases, better screening of doctors, mandatory reporting requirements that might have caught what was happening to me if they'd existed then. It's not enough. It will never be enough, but it's something. And I'm something too. Not spare parts, not a donor, not a sick child who exists only to save someone else. I'm Maya Chen. I'm a survivor. I'm a college student. I'm a daughter, a sister. A person with a future that belongs entirely to me. They told me I was dying. I was. They told me I was nothing without them. I was. They told me my only value was in what they could take from me. They were wrong. I'm still here, and I'm never, ever letting anyone make me feel disposable again.